in my office that I had on Wilshire Boulevard, there were 3 floors of just therapists. And I was
Yeah.
like, we're so fortunate, and then flash back to like my hometown, there's like 4,
Mm.
and so I think that making it available to everybody, so at least people can put language to it, because sometimes we don't even know what we don't know. It'd be like me, I don't know, like we had to call an HVAC guy to come into our house because it was acting funny. I don't know how to ask for that. I don't even know what I'm just like, can you just do a service call? What's the, like you take your car and you're like, it's making this funny noise. We don't know how to use that language. And I think YouTube's a
Yeah.
really powerful place because you can watch videos about anything you don't know about and get some language to put to it so you can ask for the right help.
Hi, Katie. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Good. Nice to meet you.
Katie used to live in the neighborhood now, and she's reporting live from Austin, Texas. How's the mental health of Austin, Texas?
I think it's like everywhere else in the world. It's a little touch and go. First of all, we've all been traumatized by what happened. And then second of all, and I don't know if you guys agree with this or not, and it's not politically driven by any means, but I feel like we've been so divided that it's like the me versus you, which is never a healthy place to be in. I think I'd hoped that of all the nasty things that COVID brought, that the silver lining would be it brought us together.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't. And so, I mean, Texas, even though people think of Texas in whatever way they do, Austin's definitely a little different than, let's say Dallas or San Antonio or something. So yeah, there's definitely a little, rub there. So,
what can we all do now? I mean, a lot of people are just sitting around waiting for it to go back to the way it was. It doesn't seem like it's ever going to go back to the way it was. How do we live going forward now?
Yeah, I don't know if it'll go back exactly the way it was. I mean, maybe over time, right? Time does heal in some ways, especially if we keep talking about it. That's part of the healing. But I think, going forward, the best things we can do is reconnect. I know a lot of people get scared, and when I say reconnect, that doesn't mean go to a huge stadium filled with 30,000 people or whatever. It's more like reconnect with your friends and family, spend time in person with people that you feel okay doing so. If that's outside, that's fine. But I think that disconnection, the isolation, even personally, I like to think of myself as someone who has like this huge list of ways I take care of myself. Like I go to a yoga studio where I just get to chit chat with the ladies that I see every morning. And then I stop by my favorite coffee place. There were all these things that I would do. All of that was just taken away at once. And so I think slowly reintegrating in a way that feels okay for everybody individually, I think would be the best thing for healing.
Do you feel like it's like everybody's feeling a deep sense of loss just around what happened all this time?
Yeah, grief, I think, is definitely palpable. Like it could be as silly, and I'm not trying to minimize anybody's upset, but like I'm a huge George Strait fan. Okay. I was born and raised in a very small town in Washington State on a Christmas tree farm. I love country music, but I like old school country music. So George Strait is my man. And I had always wanted to go to one of his concerts and get like crazy good tickets, but couldn't afford it as a kid. And so last year I heard he was coming to Vegas, and me and my friend Linnea were like, we're going to buy some really good tickets and we're going to go. And it was for August 24th of 2020. I was like, no.
Yeah.
And so there's grief like that. And then there's also grief of lost loved ones. And then there's just grief of 2 years, and all that could encapsulate for everybody what you might have thought. Like I had a friend who's been trying to be an actress for a really long time, and she felt like things were finally taking off. And then she, the show that was supposed to be scheduled to film everything, she felt like it just got taken away. And so I think there's a lot of layers of grief for all of us.
You talked about the isolation, and I think a lot of people that I talk to as well, and there's a little bit of agoraphobia everywhere, people not wanting to go out, and it's easier sometimes to hide, and you don't even know that you're doing that. And this way that we're communicating is, okay, well, that's a replacement. And it's interesting that you do so much work on YouTube, and how important it is, how can we use this tool as a place for well-being? That's your whole life's work, I guess, really.
Yeah, and it is, this kind of connection is some connection. Like we do find through research, I don't know how nerdy you want me to get into it, but I kind of, sometimes it's enjoyable to understand things a little bit more. They find if we're online and we continue to see the same avatars, So like even if we don't see faces, if we see the same avatar over and over in username, it slowly, I forget how many minutes we're supposed to spend with that person, but I want to say it's like 20 minutes at least 3 times a week.
Right.
And you see that person repeatedly, you start to build a rapport, and that feels similar to, let's say, us going out for drinks and some appetizers and connecting. You start to feel that connection, that relationship, but it takes a little bit more. Again, you'd have to do it for that amount of time, over time. Whereas if we just got together in person, I get that same like hit of dopamine and that feel good.
I mean, do you think that avatars and the metaverse can be a replacement for human interaction, or is there something hardwired into us that we need to communicate with others and be with them physically?
I don't think it will replace it. I think we're hardwired for connection. I mean, I know we are. You even think of like the way our nervous system is laid out. One of our longest nerves is like our vagus nerve along our neck. And when we're being fed by our mother or whoever our caregiver is, that sucking and swallowing activates it and activates part of our brain that we form connection. And from birth, we need that contact too. Like children who aren't hugged and touched enough can struggle to have relationships and struggle to make eye contact with other people. I think there's just so much to us that, I think we all would agree, a hug in person, there's nothing like it, if it's someone you really care about.
You have, millions of followers. Do you feel like post the pandemic, if we are post the pandemic, are they different? Are they coming to you for different questions? Are they looking for something else than they did before? It almost seems like before the pandemic, we were in some sweet, easy time, even though it wasn't. But, we look back on it, we romanticize it in some way. Were people looking for different things now?
Yes and no. Mental health is mental health. It's just like our physical health. People are still struggling with depression, anxiety, and things that we all have felt at some point in our life. But I find more and more trauma-based questions. And I think that's a couple of reasons. Number one was that I believe we were all traumatized by COVID, whether we want to admit it or not. It was scary. And anybody who had previous trauma, their trauma response was like exacerbated by this. So I think that's what's bringing that up. And then the second thing that I see a lot of is like drug and alcohol addiction, like relapses. When I was writing my book that came out in September, I did a ton of research about alcohol consumption during COVID, and it went up by something crazy. I want to say it was like 238%.
Right.
And I was like, I felt that. I remember at the beginning, my husband and I'd be like, well, it's 3:00. I'll have a glass of wine. Like I would never have done that on a regular, like pre-COVID. So, if I had struggled with addiction, I could understand I don't know what to do. AA meetings weren't happening. Again, we're not getting the connection. A lot of those self-care tools aren't available. Relapse rates have been really high.
For people who have no training, such as myself, you start to see people who have trauma. I have, a lot of friends who've been through traumatic experiences, lost loved ones, more than ever, they seem to be talking about and feeling isolation. Like how can, non-experts be helpful to people who are suffering?
The best thing we can do is just check in with one another. Also, I caution people, you don't have to fix. Please don't, actually. There's different ways we can listen, and the best way to listen is to learn. Imagine that your friend is just teaching you about their experience, right? I don't understand, help me understand. And I think coming from that perspective will not only allow them to open up more, but they'll also feel more connected because you're not trying to tell them what to do. And I know for anybody who's more of the mothering type or a fix-it type person, like, well, I just want to make you feel better. That's the best way you can make them feel better, is listening to learn. And then sometimes just showing up and just checking in a very casual way. Like I always tell people, a lot of times, anyone who's struggling with depression or addiction or any kind of overwhelm that they're feeling, having someone just show up maybe with Chinese takeout and just hang out in your house and watch some TV, you don't have to talk. It's just being there. And I think sometimes those check-ins and stopping by can really, really, really help people.
Katie, I think you're sort of interested in sort of people being genetically predisposed to certain, traumas or, addictions and things like that. And what can be done? How do people go about finding out more about that to know whether you might have a pre-condition?
The best way, and not the easiest way, is to talk to family. And I find, I don't know if anybody else feels this way, but in the past couple of years, my family's even been more open with it. I don't know if it's just because we're talking about it more. I know that's not the same for everybody, But, if there's a member of your family who will talk about it, who's older, who can tell you, because for instance, in my experience, like I'm definitely more of an anxious type person. I'm a little type A, I overwork myself. That's what I work on in my therapy time. And I've known that for a while. And I've been in therapy off and on since I was 15. And it was 2 or 3 years ago that my Aunt Rhonda was like, oh yeah, I have anxiety. Your grandma does too. And, I've been taking medication. And it was like all these people, boop, 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 boop. And she's like, yeah, so that makes sense. Like that tracks. And so if you can find out, what people in your family have struggled with, really the best way is through those conversations. Because for as far as I know, there aren't like genetic tests that we can do. We can do tests to find out what medications might work best for us, or, what our genetic breakdown is as far as where we're from, like the 23andMe and stuff like that. But when it comes to mental illnesses, the best way is just to talk to people in your family.
You talked earlier about how we're in a very polarized time. There seems that there's a real anti-science mood in the country going on. And a lot of times it feels like a cognitive dissonance that's existing in terms of like, well, you get this thing in your arm. We all have been vaccinated against smallpox and, all these things, polio, they were pretty effective. So it's hard for me to understand what's going on in the mind of people when they're saying, well, I don't want to get this shot. I don't really understand. Do you have any insights about that?
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts. First of all, let's talk about media. I really have to lay a lot of the blame on them. I'm still to this day so frustrated that we didn't have just this joined front from the beginning, that like, here's what's happening. We're in a crisis. Here are the things that we should do across all, I don't care what channel you're watching. I will never understand. Like, I remember watching CNN and hearing them say that New York was having their own coalition to look at the vaccine because it came under Trump and they don't trust it. And then like 3 weeks later, when he'd lost the election or whatever, they're like, well, now everybody needs to get it. And I'm like, you shouldn't have any conversations like that, because people are going to get upset, get frustrated. And I really think that that has a lot to do with it. And then there's also the component of like our inner child. And I think when people are told you have to do something, there's a little bit of tantruming. And I feel like, again, it's just in the communication. And to make it worse, because I was even having a conversation with my audience about this just yesterday, because I have a lot of audience members from all over the world who have all varying thoughts. And because we've been divided for so long, I don't know if people ever felt okay just having conversations. And I think it's through real conversations with people you love and trust that then you make decisions. Everybody wants to protect those that they love.
Yeah.
That's just a human condition. So the fact that people are struggling with this, I feel like goes back to like how it's been communicated and the struggle, the distance, the isolation,
There's been so much trauma as of late, but how common is trauma under the best of circumstances?
Very common. I think it's way more common than people realize. I've been talking more recently, and even in my book, about big T's versus little t trauma. Because a lot of times when we think of trauma, and maybe it's because of where PTSD came from, right? The term shell shock from men being in war, right? And coming back not the same. And that was kind of where PTSD was born. However, we know more now that it's not just going to war. It's not just being in a really bad crash or being abused as a kid for a really long time. Yes, that does cause PTSD. But it's also traumatic? Going through a divorce, moving a lot, losing a job, being in poverty. And nobody really talks about those traumas and how that can really affect someone. And so I believe even prior to the pandemic, I wouldn't be surprised if 75, 80% of people had a trauma.
Yeah. Katie, it's really interesting because, there is, and I was on a search, there is a lack of therapists. I think you probably know this. You cannot find people. There's, full disclosure, I had gone through another trauma over COVID thing. Something happened to me. I was in and out of the hospital, and I really needed to find some help and somebody to talk to. And it was because it was a life-changing moment. It's literally impossible. But so what do you think about that? Because it seems like people are out there looking for help. And a lot of it is, by the way, Zoom, virtual, kind of what you're doing. And do you think more people coming forward because it's maybe a little easier to be a little bit vulnerable, not having to be in the room with somebody? But, why do we have this? It's like supply, just like everything else. You can't get a car, you can't get a therapist.
Yeah, there definitely has been a surge. And I think because of us all being traumatized, I think that's part of it. But the lack of therapists, I've been encouraging people. I'm like, if you want to go to school, finish school, get licensed, or sign up to do some of the BetterHelp Talkspace, the online. I think that does make it easier for people. I mean, even in LA, I'll be honest, like I would only see a therapist if they were, west of the 405. Like I'm not going to go east. That's too much,
Yeah.
And that limits like who you can see. And then you think
Yeah.
of cost, and the cost can be so high because our rent is high, and I think bringing the prices down because online therapy is cheaper. And then you don't have to leave your home. Just got to like, put on your nice top and make yourself kind
Yeah.
of look presentable. You don't have to really be put together. It makes it that much easier. You don't have to drive and park and all of that. And so I think that's why we saw the surge and why people are struggling. I mean, I've been trying to find a therapist in Texas and I've been having a hard time too. They're not taking new patients and we're all definitely affected.
I saw your movie about being a new patient. I thought that was pretty good.
Oh, good. Yeah.
But you see this shortage in not just in therapists, you see it in physicians, dentists, nurses. People have a high level of burnout, and therapy online. Do you think that that's as effective as sitting across from somebody, and talking to them, or do you think that something's lost in the translation?
I think something's lost. It's still effective. I don't want anybody to not do it if that's the only option, especially people in rural communities. Like I grew up in a town that to this day still doesn't have 8,000 people in it. It's very small. And I was trying to find my mom a therapist and like, good luck, And so opening it up to the entire state of Washington, where she is, gave her so many other options. So she's been doing online therapy and it's been so much better. But it's just so, there is something lost when you're doing it virtually versus in person. For instance, body language. It's easy to keep this part fine, but what if I was like shaking my leg below and you couldn't see, or even, this sounds bad to say, but some of my patients struggle with hygiene and I would notice it more if they were in session, right? If it, it's harder for them to pretend to look, like I said, you can just kind of make it, pinch your cheeks a little, make yourself look a little better. Even it has touched up my appearance in a lot of these things. So there's a lot of ways to hide it. And also I specialize in eating disorder treatment and self-injury, and they'll wear a lot of layers of clothes and I want to see them. And so I do think there is something to that. Not to mention just the energy in the room. I think, again, kind of back to that connection that we need with each other. I think there is something missing. Even with masks, it's still difficult because facial expressions can tell us sometimes more than words do.
I had that experience. We haven't been in meetings for almost 2 years. And I went into a meeting recently and everybody was wearing masks. And I have no idea how much I rely on the visual cues to understand what we're talking about. When they have a mask on you, I mean, it's fine if you're going out and you're trying to order some food or something, but if you're trying to really think about something, I found it very difficult to proceed in the meeting that way. With eating disorders, has the climate of eating disorders changed as kids just stay home, as people just stay home so they're not going out? Has that lessened it? Has it increased it?
And I'd add to that the Instagram, kind of the sort of social media with eating disorders adding to the problem.
Yeah, definitely Instagram, the comparison factor, man. I'm so grateful that I'm old enough that I did not grow up with any of this. I had a tough enough time being okay with myself as a teenager. It definitely, again, kind of to the drug and addiction. I put eating disorders and self-injury kind of in that same bucket of it's a coping skill for something else going on, right? Whether that's trauma or whatever's going on, right? Overwhelm, not having any skills.
Is suicide in that same bucket?
The thoughts sometimes can fall into that bucket, like the ideation, because it's like a lot of my patients have told me, even my viewers, that like it's a way out. So it kind of feels like it's a thing. Oh, I can think on this and I'll feel better. So yeah, that's a good point to bring up. But I have found that eating disorder, like relapses, have gone up again, just like drug and alcohol addiction, because we've been at home, stuck with our thoughts, not as many distractions. Especially my binge eaters really struggled. People joked about like, oh, I put on the COVID-15 or the quarantine 15, and a lot of my patients, struggled to not overeat. I mean, I'll be honest, I was making brownies and like sourdough bread just like everybody else, because what else was I going to do with my time?
Right. You mentioned there's techniques or skills. What kind of things can individuals think about? You mentioned earlier you go to yoga. It's like, what kind of coping skills are out there that we could use to help mitigate some of these feelings?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few things we can do. I think getting outside, getting some sun on your face, even if it's cold, bundle up, let your face get some sunlight. Vitamin D is very important and it really affects our mood. There's a reason seasonal affective disorder exists because lack of sunlight, like it gets dark at 5:30 and I'm like, time for bed. It's like really messes with me. And a lot of people, it messes with them. So that's a really good thing is just getting outdoors and moving your body. I always tell people, let the movement meet you where you're at. You don't have to start doing like Pilates or yoga or something. I mean, I do love yoga because you can do it no matter what level. Like you can put your knees down, you can go under your elbow, you can, adjust as needed, but just walk around the block, walk down to the coffee shop, make eye contact with a stranger. All of those things are really important and can be really healing, that connection, that movement. And then if you're feeling overwhelmed and you start to feel, we all know that feeling, it just kind of starts bubbling up. If you feel that rising up and you're like doing those deep breaths, you feel it in your shoulders, do a full body shake. Sounds really crazy, but shake out like a wet dog, like from your nose to your tail, because that tricks our nervous system. It like initiates our nervous system dumping some of that stress response. And our stress response is like that fight flight. So all of that queued up energy that we've had doesn't have an outlet because we can't, oftentimes what we're stressed about, we can't run from, we can't fight back. What do? And so moving your body, just really giving it a good shake, just initiates that. And I'll tell you, it helps me with like racing thoughts at night of like worry, like, oh my God, what am I going to do? It can stop that. And then the third, and I guess the final one I'll mention is just taking action where you can. That's why people were making sourdough bread at the beginning and organizing their homes and stuff, is because it's the inaction. We feel like helpless, hopeless. But if you can do one thing, it helps keep us motivated. It helps us feel better. It empowers us instead of being disempowering. And so, if you're feeling overwhelmed, pick one small thing you can do today. And by small, I mean you can accomplish it within a half an hour to an hour. It's not like this multi-level, multi-day event. Break it into smaller chunks. It might be like, I need to make sure I put my laundry in. Okay, let's do one load of laundry today. And that's your to-do. That can really help too.
You came from a very small town. Was there a specific moment where you thought, wow, this is what I want to do with my life?
Yes and no. I mean, even as a younger kid, like I've always been definitely what people call like an old soul. I'm like an overthinker. My mom would always, I'd ask her questions about like, I don't even know. She'd remember more because she'll tell me, she's like, you'd ask me the craziest stuff. And like, I wouldn't know how to answer you. And she'd be like, why are you thinking about that? You're like 8 years old, Right. I'd be like, well, do you feel fulfilled? Like just ridiculous questions for a kid to ask. Right. So I was always that kid. And then when I was in middle school, which is like such a tough time, hormones and gossip and all that stuff kind of starts. I remember taking pride in being like the secret keeper and loving to like listen to people and knowing that I was like a vault, wouldn't leave me. I think without realizing that's like where my interest in psychology was born. And then it was my junior year of high school. They opened up like a Psych 101 class. And one of my friends was like, I want to take it. Why don't we take it together? Like sign up, the teacher seems nice. It'll be easy, blah, blah, blah. And I loved it. That was like, I think this is what I want to do. And I also loved music. So when I went to Pepperdine, I was like a music minor and a psych major and looked into doing music therapy for a while, but really, just through life and experiences, found myself where I'm at.
At Pepperdine, was there a moment where you saw, wow, this is a whole vista of information that I'm getting into? There's a whole world here. I hadn't, you maybe had an instinct about it, but you saw a much deeper thing.
Yeah, I mean, on so many levels. First of all, growing up in a small town, like I was so naive about so many things in general. A college experience was really great for me because like, as simple as like, I didn't know fancy brands of anything because I grew up like in the country and that stuff wasn't important. If it didn't work for you, it wasn't necessary. So that was a shocker, and just people being different. But definitely in school, when it comes to like the psychology realm, it was graduate school. Well, actually, that's a lie. There was a class in my undergrad called Social Deviance. I loved it. It was so fascinating to learn about why people do the things they do and cult activity and what that, I found it so fascinating. Yeah, and I think at that point I was like,
you watch
like
shows like Criminal Minds and things like that?
Yes, I love that stuff. I'm like such a crime junkie. If it wasn't so dangerous, that's what I would have done. I would have loved to go into prisons and talk to people.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a little scary.
That you're really peering into the heart of darkness at that point, Yeah,
and it's a little much, I'm like, ugh, but I'm so interested in it. And I think it was at that point I was like, I could really use this degree in so many different ways. There's so much you can do. People are fascinating.
Now, your first patient, what was the first time you really saw a patient and it was not a friend, it was not somebody you're trying to help. What was that like? Was it a scary moment? Were you prepared for it? What's that like?
I think you're prepared, but you're never, like anything, anybody on their first day on the job thinks, I don't know what I'm doing. Oh my God, oh my God. You have that like panic. I worked at this clinic in North Hollywood, and my first patient was an 8-year-old girl. And I'm really thankful that it was like a younger girl, only because we just played. And I got to figure out what it's like to, like in therapy, we call like holding the space for someone, but especially with children, they're much slower. It's not like when I go to therapy, I'm definitely like a dump everything. Like, oh my God, this has just been like, that's how I am. Children aren't like that because they don't really understand, right, what therapy is like. And so that really allowed me to learn patience and to be able to be quiet and know that that's okay. And yeah, I was definitely nervous. And then the clock, small story, the clock wasn't working. It just stopped halfway through the session, just stopped going, of course. And I was like, okay, you have like 20 minutes left. So just like get a feel for like 20 minutes.
It's always a terrible moment when the therapist looks at the clock. You just think, oh, my, what I'm telling them must be boring. You know what I mean?
We're just making sure, honestly,
Yeah.
for me, it's usually just a check-in. It might be because you're being so interesting, I've lost track of time.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure I'm not running over. But yeah, that was definitely just a funny moment. And I ended up okay. I came out, just like 5 minits later than normal.
Yeah.
We were all good. But yeah, that was my first patient. I was definitely nervous.
I have a question around, look, COVID is leveled all of us, traumatized all of us, but pre-COVID, and you've been working pre-COVID, you talk about like a toxic world, the anxiety, the anxiousness. Do you think that any of the lessons learned can be learned? In other words, people are quitting their jobs in droves. There's the Great Resignation. People are not going back to or at least right now. And what is the correlation between, that and sort of lessening, kind of the hysteria or whatever, the trauma, and yet we see more suicide, all of these, there's a paradox going on. Where do you see we might all be going, taking everything with us and looking back and then looking forward?
Not to like boil it down to one thing, but when we share in a trauma, it becomes really apparent what levels of resilience people have, because that's really what we're talking about here. Like suicide rates have gone up, relapse rates, eating disorders, depression, all of mental health, really, we're in a crisis there too now. And I knew that was coming because of the isolation and the trauma. And so people who were maybe barely hanging on are having a really hard time. And then those people who found solace in it and got to like almost reevaluate, because sometimes in the wake of a trauma, people look at their life and they're like, hey, I don't really like this 9 to 5. It's not fulfilling. I don't feel good about what I do, and so people who have more resources, whether that means like more friends and family that were around. A lot of my friends did the pod thing where they had a group of 10 or 15 that agreed just to see each other from the beginning. And they were doing way better than my other friends who like lived alone and struggled to get back in contact. And so I really think, I don't know if this answers your question, Priscilla, let me know, but like, it's kind of, that's the divergence. I think it's really the crux is like, how resilient were you? How well were you doing pre-COVID? Because that gave you the runway for, how long you can hold on, because it was rough. And I think the people not going back to work are the ones that were like, I did some contemplation. I had some downtime. I saved a lot of money because I wasn't going out to eat and I wasn't traveling. I think I'm going to quit,
Was there a moment you realized that YouTube could be a good, tool for people to get help?
Yeah, it actually happened pretty quickly. So I started YouTube back in 2011. And at first, it's like you get 10 views on a video and you're like, yeah. And I'm like, oh, it's probably just my mom and like me clicking twice, But then the comments started coming through. And it's funny because some of my first 3 viewers or community members were from completely different parts of the world. We had like one in the UK, well, actually 2 in the UK. One was like in London, one was like, outside the city, and then one in Germany. And I think it was, when I realized that when they would share where they were from, I was like, this is so much more than I can just do in my private practice, because the reach is so much greater. There is power in the one-to-one relationship and the ability to help one person at a time for 50 minutes or an hour, but the ability to help millions is pretty amazing. And I think, I mean, obviously YouTube's grown into more than I ever thought it would. I mean, it was just like a passion project. You couldn't make money, you couldn't do thumbnails. It was just a very different time. But it was pretty quickly that I realized just how powerful social media was, especially YouTube, and the power of video. Because a lot of people have been following me since then, and they know me, you know, they feel like they know me because they do. I mean, they've kind of watched me grow up in certain ways too.
Yeah, it seems like it's really a good thing for people to check in with and get a view of something they maybe can't just get easily where they are.
Totally. And I don't
Exactly.
think mental health help should be behind paywalls and only for people in city centers. You know, I've always felt very fortunate to have resources. I mean, in Los Angeles in particular, because that's like most of my adult life, is like even in my office that I had on Wilshire Boulevard, there were 3 floors of just therapists. And I was
Yeah.
like, we're so fortunate, you know, and then flash back to like my hometown, there's like 4, you know, and so I think that making it available to everybody, so at least people can put language to it, because sometimes we don't even know what we don't know. You know, it'd be like me, I don't know, like we had to call an HVAC guy to come into our house because it was acting funny. I don't know how to ask for that. I don't even know what to I'm just like, can you just do a service call? What's the, you know, like you take your car and you're like, it's making this funny noise. We don't know how to use that language. And I think YouTube's a really powerful place because you can watch videos about anything you don't know about and get some language to put to it so you can ask for the right help.
Yeah. Well, wonderful. You know, Katie, thank you so much for coming on here and sharing your insights. Really, really appreciate it. You know,
Yeah, of course.
followed the channel, you know, I'm a fan, and just, you know, thank you for being here, you know?
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah. To reiterate what Jesse said, I think this your last point about, you know, you can start to listen to something, you know, you can start somewhere, and it should not just be, you know, mental health, which is your physical health as well, shouldn't just be for people who have the money, and there are resources out there. And I think that is incredibly important. So you're doing great work.
Yeah.
Thank you. And enjoy Austin, you know, enjoy Austin.
Yeah, I will. Thank you.